This week saw the 200th birthday of one of the most influential English women of all time. And no, although it may seem as if she's been on the throne for 200 years, I'm not talking about the Queen. And welcome to the second episode for the Bronte Network. As promised, in this video I will be looking at Charlotte Bronte's life in more detail. If you've not already, I would recommend watching my previous video where I provide some background information to the Brontes more widely. Lucasta Miller begins her brilliant book, The Bronte Myth, by saying that if Charlotte were alive today and saw that her portrait was hanging in the National Portrait Gallery, and that visitors were coming from all over the world to see her home in Haworth, she probably wouldn't be that surprised. This is a woman who from a very early age courted the idea of celebrity, and in 1836 actually summoned up the courage to write to the then poet laureate Robert Southey asking for his advice. His reply, in which he says literature cannot be the business of a woman's life, and nor ought to be, is now infamous, seen as representative of the terrible chauvinism of the period. However, what Southey seems to be saying is that Charlotte shouldn't desire to be an author just for celebrity, but to write poetry for its own sake, not in a spirit of emulation. He is advising her to write because she wants to write, not because she desires to seek fame. Charlotte Bronte recognised this sentiment within his letter, and in a second letter written in response, she writes, "You do not forbid me to write, you do not say what I write is utterly destitute of merit. You only warn me against the folly of neglecting real duties for the sake of imaginative pleasures, of writing for the love of fame, for the selfish excitement of emulation." However, as any writer will tell you, this is far easier said than done, and whilst working as a teacher at Roe Head, Charlotte Bronte writes, "I longed to write. The spirit of all Verdopolis, of all the mountains north, of all the woodlands west, of all the river watered east, came crowding into my mind. If I had had time to indulge it, I felt that the vague sensations of that moment would have settled down into a narrative better at least than anything I have ever produced before. But just then a dolt came up with a lesson. I thought I should have vomited." Charlotte is recognising that it is impossible to limit her creative imagination, and this is not really surprising. From a young age, the Brontes were encouraged to read whatever they liked, and not only from their own books at home, but from Pondon Hall down the road, which had one of the largest, if not the largest, libraries in the area at that time. So the Brontes had free access to a wide range of imaginative texts. And from this, they conjured up their own worlds. In that extract I've just read, Charlotte talks about Verdopolis. This was a mystical town that she had created in her fictional kingdom of Angria. And if you probably know just one thing about the Brontes, it's the fact that they wrote an incredibly tiny handwriting as children. Their books still survive, and they really are minuscule, almost illegible. In fact, one may wonder how anyone could write in such small print. However, it's important to remember that Charlotte was extremely short-sighted. So short-sighted, in fact, that she was unable to play the piano as she couldn't read the music. So, with this in mind, reading like this was probably easier for her than writing like this. Poor eyesight wasn't Charlotte Bronte's only health problem. In fact, her teeth were in terrible condition, and in fact so awful that Elizabeth Gaskell comments on them in a letter to a friend. In terms of literary influences, Charlotte looked back to the Romantics, particularly the works of Byron, whom she admired enormously. She also looked further back to William Shakespeare, and there is a letter in which she advises her friend to read the tragedies of Shakespeare, but to avoid the comedies, which she thought would upset her friend's sensitive temperament. Another major influence for Charlotte was the painter John Martin. His landscapes of heavenly and hellish scenes are on an enormous scale and conjure up incredible biblical images. Some writers have seen how these pictures have influenced Charlotte's descriptions, most notably in the carnival scene in Villette. And the Brontes grew up with the works of John Martin. Prints of his were dotted around the house, and Charlotte's brother Bramwell actually copied out one of Martin's pictures, which still hangs on the walls of the parsonage. However, in terms of people that definitely did not influence Charlotte, top of the list has to be Jane Austen. In a letter to Lewis of the Edinburgh Review, Charlotte writes that Jane Austen lacks passion and can never be great. The other important thing to remember about Charlotte is this is a woman whose mother had died when she was only a few years old. In addition, Charlotte's eldest two sisters, Maria and Elizabeth, had died at the ages of 10 and 12, meaning that Charlotte unexpectedly found herself as the mother figure of the family. However, this was challenged when Aunt Bramwell, Patrick Bronte's sister-in-law, arrived at the parsonage to offer assistance with the children. She only intended to stay a few months, but ended up staying for the rest of her life. Considering that this is a woman who was used to the luxuries of the Cornish seaside, to arrive in the industrial mill town that was Haworth must have been a shock to her. Nevertheless, she seemed to take her duties in her stride. However, at times, Aunt Bramwell and Charlotte seemed to bristle on maternal issues, and it was a tension that never quite went away. Charlotte's duties as matriarch didn't just end after Emily and Anne's deaths. In fact, in her preface to the second edition of Agnes Grey and Wuthering Heights, Charlotte defends her sisters' reputations against the allegations of coarseness that surrounded their texts. So her big sister influence continued even after her sisters had died. As I mentioned in my previous video, one of the most important events of Charlotte's life was her trip to Brussels, the narrative of which forms the backbone to her third novel, Villette. While she was in Belgium, she fell in love with her professor, Monsieur Aguerre, and on her return to Haworth wrote him some extremely passionate letters, shocking even by today's standards. In one she writes, "Day and night I find neither rest nor peace. If I sleep I have tormenting dreams in which I see you always severe, always saturnine and angry with me. Forgive me then, monsieur, if I take the step of writing you again. How can I bear my life unless I make an effort to alleviate its sufferings?" In another she writes, "I would rather undergo the greatest bodily pains than have my heart constantly lacerated by searing regrets. If my master withdraws his friendship from me entirely, I shall be absolutely without hope." Unsurprisingly, Constantine Aguerre was not amused by these letters and tore them into pieces and threw them away. His wife rescued these pieces from the bin and stitched them back together, and now they are still available to view at the British Library, stuck meticulously back together. Although Gaskell knew about these letters when she wrote her biography of Charlotte Bronte, she very deliberately left them out, and in fact they didn't enter the public domain until 1913. The final thing I wanted to mention in this video is Charlotte Bronte's marriage, and of course she was the only one of Patrick Bronte's children to actually get married. At first it seems that Patrick was reluctant at the match, and when Arthur Bell Nicholls asked for his daughter's hand in marriage for the first time, he refused. Charlotte kept up a secret correspondence with him. She married him later, however, with her father's blessing, although Patrick did not actually attend his daughter's wedding, staying at the parsonage, which may seem to suggest that he was not, even at that late stage, completely comfortable with the match. At first, it seems that Charlotte was unsure about the institution of marriage, writing in a letter, "I really seem to have had scarcely a spare moment to myself since that dim, quiet June morning." Once Charlotte settled into married life, it seems to me that she rather enjoyed it, writing in one letter that whilst she was worried that her husband would pander and fuss needlessly on a cliff-top walk, he actually left her to the peace and quiet that she so desired, only interfering when she wandered too near to the cliff edge. Of course, the other important thing to remember about Charlotte Bronte is that she was the only one of the siblings to die from a cause other than tuberculosis. She died of severe morning sickness whilst pregnant. I hope you've enjoyed this video and it's given you some more information about Charlotte Bronte's interesting life. Something you may have noticed is that I've not mentioned any of her books or poems, and this is a deliberate decision, as I will be focusing on them in much more detail in specific videos. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please let me know what you think in the comments below, like this video, and subscribe to the channel The Bronte Network. Thank you.